you know, as Yara said, these ideas were created 100 years ago, but we had capitalism 100 years ago and we still have capitalism today. So we're still fighting that same fight. But Trotsky himself, he didn't just come to this idea out of nowhere either. He was studying things from his history and of his past to get him to the conclusions of permanent revolution. And so what I'm referencing is the 1905 revolution in Russia. The 1917, that's the famous one. That was the very successful one. But many people are unaware that there was something happening in 1905 as well. So can you talk a little bit how Trotsky used the experiences of that time to help him draw his conclusions?
Well, yes, of course. I mean, 1905, as you said, was the first revolution in Russia, and it was widespread. I live in Moscow, and I live just down the road from the region where the 1905 revolution took place, and there's a big statue to the heroes of that time. And it was a revolution that taught Trotsky, taught is perhaps not the correct word, but Trotsky used the experience of the revolution to actually develop and fine-hone the theory that he developed during the course of that year. 1905, we should remember, started as an almost naive plea by thousands of workers who were led by an unconventional priest, this Father Gapon, who some say was a Tsarist agent. He led the workers on a demonstration to deliver a petition to the Tsar in his palace, asking the father of the people to come out and help them. And of course, the Tsar wasn't so friendly. He sent his troops out. They fired on the demonstration. Hundreds were killed. And that since then has been called Bloody Sunday. This discontent was driven by the dire poverty of the peasantry, the oppression of the national minorities, and there were many, and there still are in Russia. And it followed on from a wave of workers' strikes, which started in the south, in the Caucasus, around the oil fields in Baku, before reaching Petrograd. And of course, it was all exasperated by the disastrous Russo-Japanese War, in which the Tsar lost his whole Pacific fleet almost in one day. You also had a layer, of course, of the developing middle class and the new bourgeois, who were fed up and who couldn't exist within the straitjacket of the old Tsarist autocratic system. So as you had the demonstrations, the peasant uprising, the strikes spreading across Russia, they developed eventually, by October, into an all-out general strike in Petrograd itself. And during the course of that, you had the establishment of a Petrograd Soviet. Soviet in Russian is just the word for a council. It was a council of workers' deputies, workers' representatives, which was formed, it met regularly, and it took the leadership of the movement. And of course, it should be commented on that Trotsky became the president of that workers' Soviet. And the working class was still a small proportion of the Russian population at the time. Compared to the working class in the industrialized countries today, it was a very, very small proportion. But it stepped up, it organized, and it took the leading role in that revolution. And what was the position of the bourgeois, the liberal bourgeois? It was supposed to be their revolution. It was supposed to be the revolution to end autocracy, to bring about elements of democracy, to help solve the national question. They were more worried, more frightened of the working class and the peasantry movement than they were of the autocracy. So they spent the whole year trying to cuddle up to the autocracy. In the run-up to the revolution, they'd organised a whole series of banquets where they invited leading figures from the autocracy and liberal society to raise money to argue for reforms, democratic reforms. And of course, the Tsar completely ignored them. And it was out of these experiences that Trotsky developed his theory of permanent revolution. And actually, his theory of permanent revolution is actually, it sounds difficult, but if you think about it, it's not that difficult to grasp. I'll just point out some of the key features of it. In countries with underdeveloped capitalism, the bourgeois class is too weak to achieve its own democratic and national emancipation. Only the working class leading the nation with the support of the peasantry can do this. The land and the national question can only be solved by an alliance between the workers and peasantry under the leadership of a workers' revolutionary party. but only by conducting an irreconcilable struggle against the national liberal bourgeoisie. If the working class, led by the Revolutionary Party, comes to power, in implementing the task of the democratic revolution, it soon confronts the questions of bourgeois property. The democratic revolution becomes a socialist revolution, and it therefore becomes permanent. And actually, in early descriptions, they called it not permanent, but unbroken. It was an unbroken revolution that continued. A socialist revolution, whether in a backward or a long-established capitalist country, clashes with national limitations. Therefore, it has to spread internationally. The socialist revolution begins on the national arena, it unfolds on the international, and is completed on the world arena. And if you look just at one or two examples from Myanmar today, you see the situation there. If the masses in Myanmar who are fighting heroically want to defeat the army, one of the main things they have to do is to break the economic might of the army, the big conglomerates that the army controls, that it gets its income from. It's going from democratic rights into economic rights. And if Myanmar wants to win and survive as a new democratic society, it also has to confront the situation with its neighbours and, of course, the situation in China. So it becomes an international revolution that is needed. And I think in that sense, we see that the revolution of 100 years ago is still extremely relevant for today.